Hello and welcome. Let me just turn down the volume here and let me just open up the main screen here. Right, so guys, if you can let me know that you can hear me and you can hear Ableton. I'm just going to put something playing in Ableton. So if you can just let me know that you can hear me and you can hear Ableton and you can see me, and when I pull this up here like this, you can see Ableton nice and clearly. That'd be really nice. Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone. Nice to see a nice busy class today. Firstly, I want to apologise about the one-to-one slots, right? That doesn't normally happen, and what we're looking into at the moment is a possibility of another instructor coming on to share the course with me, because you know, I'm super busy at the moment. I'm doing loads of touring. There's a hell of a lot of students in this class, so it may be the case that someone comes and shares it with me. So that's why I haven't got back to your emails just yet. Secondly, I'd just like to say hello and welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to working with you. This is the Masterclass. The format of the Masterclass is normally I'll demonstrate for about 30 minutes and then it's question time over to you guys. Today I'm gonna, because it's the first Masterclass, I'm gonna give basically a very quick rough tour of Ableton and explain why I think Ableton is where it is today and the things that kind of make Ableton unique. So without further ado, let me just open up the Ableton screen here. Right, so I've been using Ableton for about 15 years now, and the thing about Ableton that made it really cutting edge, well, there's two things that made it really cutting edge at the time it was released. You know, the first thing was warping. Now, warping is kind of automatic time stretching of a sample. Before you had warping, you know, a lot of the old samplers, you know, especially the mid to late 90s samplers, had time stretching on them. Now, time stretching meant that you could basically change the BPM of a sample without changing the pitch, because BPM and pitch are kind of intertwined in most scenarios. If you speed up a record on a vinyl record, the pitch gets higher. If you speed up a tape, the pitch gets higher. It's the same on an old sampler. If you speed it up, the pitch gets higher. Now, this wasn't really desirable. You know, you want to be able to change the speed of the sample without changing the pitch of the sample. So before time stretching, these things were locked in together. You couldn't do it any other way. What time stretching did, it used a you know, a clever bit of computer algorithms, or a clever computer algorithm to add bits to the sample or take bits away from the sample grains. And what you'd do, you'd either stretch the sample out or you'd shrink it. And that meant that the BPM would change, but not the pitch. So in an old sampler, if you wanted to change the BPM of a sample, and you wanted to get a looping time via time stretching, you would work out the old BPM, and then you'd work out the new BPM that you wanted, and then you'd have to work out how much percentage you want it to be faster or slower. So say that was 10%, so you had a 120 BPM sample that you wanted to make 120. Well, 10% would be 121.2, but you know, something like that, or 120.12. My maths is gone off here. Anyway, so 100% 100 BPM sample. Let's say 10%. So 110. You wanted 100 go from 100 BPM to 110 BPM. So you'd have to go into your sampler, type in plus 10 BPM. And then go away, and you could probably make a cup of tea, maybe you make yourself dinner, and by the time you came back, the sampler would have hopefully worked it out and it would have done it. So that was kind of quite old technology, but what Ableton did, which was quite impressive at the time, is that suddenly you could grab any sample at any BPM and drop it into an audio track, and it would change the BPM automatically without changing the pitch. Now, in order for it to do that, the sample had to be chopped properly. So it had to be chopped at the beginning of the first downbeat and before the next downbeat. As long as it was chopped properly and it was quite a short sample, Ableton could automatically time stretch your samples for you. Now, this was great because loop libraries have been around for a long, long time. So, you know, the loop packs that you get today were around before Ableton came out. They were around in the 90s. And, you know, they'd started releasing them as WAVs then as well. So suddenly everyone's loop packs were suddenly so much more usable. The other way that you could chop up samples was recycle. So Ableton kind of mimics that as well. And recycle was by propeller heads, and you would buy that on your computer and it would chop up your samples on your computer and you'd drop it into your sampler. So Ableton kind of mimicked that as well with its beats warping algorithm. But what it did, it made sure that you could do this stuff instantly. And that was revolutionary. There's one other piece of software that came out at the time, and that was called Sony Acid, and that did a similar thing. And, you know, for everyone, that really, really changed the game. The other thing that, so let's see if we could just get a loop, any old loop here. And I'll show you. Probably the best way to do it is to just show you, right? So we've got break, we've got processed, imported. Okay, so right, let's grab a looping sample. So that looping sample there, the original BPM of that looping sample is 122 BPM. So if I play that like this, that's 122 BPM, and I can slow that down to 119 BPM, and the pitch stays the same, and I can speed it up to 126 BPM, and the pitch stays the same. And I could get another sample of a different BPM and drop it into there, and it automatically time stretches it. So now they're automatically in time. And that really was the revolutionary thing, or one of the revolutionary things. The second revolutionary thing, which really was a massive game changer, was this view we're looking at now. Now this is called session view. Before Ableton came along, you really had two ways of arranging electronic music. You'd either use a computer sequencer, as they were called then, because they didn't really have much audio capabilities, although that was beginning to happen when Ableton came in, obviously, because it was a it was a audio loop player at the time. You didn't have MIDI in Ableton at the time, but you know it's beginning to happen. But you know, you had that traditional way of sequencing stuff, and that was this page here called the arrange page. That's where you would put things in, drop blocks on the screen like that and arrange them like that. So you would make your arrangement 100% by dropping blocks together on a screen, and it would be linear, and it would be quite, you know, for quite a lot of people it'd be counterintuitive. Other people enjoyed arranging like that, but the point was it wasn't really live. And then you had the way that a lot of the early house and techno records which were made, and that was they'd have their drum machines, they'd have their 303, they'd have their synthesizer, they'd have loads of sequencers running together, and they would sync them up via MIDI, and they would just jam with them. Now what Ableton did is it brought that idea of having multiple instruments and loops and samples together in one place that you could just kind of jam with, and you could arrange stuff live, and that's where it gets its live name from, because it's great for live performance, or even if you just want to bring a live element to your sound. Now in Ableton you get two kinds of channels. You've got your MIDI channel and your audio channel, and I'm just going to kind of give a little bit of a demonstration about what I mean with this live element. So right, I've got a loop in there. Let's put a drum kit in there. So this is like having a virtual drum machine. If I put 909 core kit, that's like having a 909 drum machine. And I'm just going to make a few of them so I could have. And the beauty about having it on a computer is you could have multiple drum machines. Like if you buy a 909 drum machine, then you only have one 909 drum machine. But in Ableton, you can have as many 909 drum machines as you want running together. So there we go, I've got that kit going there. Put some other drums in there. And I've got let's put a clap in this one. So right, there we go, kind of classic house groove. We'll look at how to create this in a little bit more detail next week. But there we go, I've got those three things running together. Now I can start to jam these out in a live way by using either the scenes, or I can trigger individual clips. I can stop this. And it soon becomes almost like having a whole bunch of, hardware sequencers, drum machines, synths or whatever you want, all running together and being able to trigger them live. Obviously access the controls live, but really, it's about triggering these clips is what makes it the live thing, which gives it the live name and gives you that live control over things. So they're the things that kind of really made Ableton stand out from the rest, and those things are things that Ableton still do very well, and I don't think anyone's quite caught up with Ableton in the live thing or the the warping thing, apart from maybe DJ software and stuff like that. So I think Ableton really did smash the ball out of the park with that one, and that's why it's become such a beast, and it's so intuitive to work with. And like I said, touched on earlier, is that when Ableton first came out, it didn't have any MIDI at all. It was just an audio. You could just play audio loops with it. So they've added more and more over the time, and it's become a fully fledged DAW now. It's super powerful, and a lot of people I know used to use other DAWs have all come over to Ableton now. It really is taking over, especially in electronic music. It's really kind of taking over the world as far as DAWs go. So let's have a little bit of a quick guided tour. I'm just going to check in on the YouTube channel, make sure everything's A-OK there. Okay, all seems good. Okay, so right. Where was I? Lost my train of thought there. Right, so right. Yeah, okay, so guided tour. Okay, so up here is your kind of to do with your BPM and syncing Ableton up to other devices. Now you can sync up Ableton to other drum machines. You can sync it up via link to other other instances of Ableton running on other computers via Wi-Fi. You can sync it up to other link-enabled apps. So you can kind of make sure that you can get Ableton in time with a lot of different things, a lot of different ways. You can also get it in sync manually. Anyone that's ambitious enough to maybe take Ableton along to a gig where they don't have any other way of syncing to their decks, or maybe even if you're really ambitious, syncing to a drummer. And you do that by hitting the tap there, so you can tap in the BPM. And then you can nudge it backwards and forwards, much in the same way you would, a record deck. You'd be like, backwards, forwards, like that. So you can nudge it backwards and forwards to get it in time. So you can cue it up manually like that. Now BPM is measured, tempo is measured in BPM, so that's beats per minute. So you can change that here. You got your time signatures here. This will be explained a little bit later on. You've also got a metronome, which is good for if you want to record stuff in and you don't have a beat laid down. So you get that click there, which allows you to get in time. Now here you've got your global quantize. Now, as people who know about programming MIDI and stuff will probably know what quantize is anyway. This is different. This actually allows you to set when your next clip is going to be dropped. So if I've got this set to, let's get everything lined up in one go like this. If this is set to 1 bar, I play that. That will play on the next logical bar when I hit that. If I set that to 8 bars and I stop that, that's not going to stop till the next logical 8 bars. That's not 8 bars later, that's the next logical 8 bars in the arrangement. So if you think about it, if it was 8 bars later, it would make everything really, really messy. There we go, it stopped there. So, if you have it to 8 bars, first time you trigger something, it'll come in on the first 8 bars, then it'll come on 16 bars, blah, 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 carry on like that. Now if you have, so that's amping it up. If you have it going down, you can get it to trigger, so that's going to trigger every 1/8 of a bar now. So and you can get stuff kind of going out of sync with itself that way, and you can get it going completely out of sync if you put none on. That's not going to. None of the clips are going to sync up at all unless you do it very manually. So I can actually get everything to get out of time with itself. So that is about when you trigger clips, basically. When your next clip is going to be triggered when you hit the play button or the stop button. That's when that's going to take effect. Okay, so next up we have this whole section here. This does quite a few things actually. So this is to do with where you are in your arrange page. This is your transport, your stop, your record, your play. This section here has a whole number of functions that are going to become a little bit clearer later on. This is your locator, point, and your punch in, loop, punch out. This pen here, this has multiple functions. It either allows draw or you to, if I put the pen on in and I'm in a MIDI clip like this, and I can draw like this. If it's not on, it won't draw like that. But it also changes the way that automation works. Once again, that's something that we're going to learn later on. Key here, that allows me to assign things on the keyboard to change parameters. MIDI does the same here. It allows me to, and this once again is quite a little bit more advanced, so I'm not going to go into much detail of that. Now these things here are really, really important. The 0% and the disc. Right, so at the moment that's at 0%. If I press play, that's going up to 2 or 3%. That's my CP usage by Ableton. And the D is the disc light. Now that will start to flash orange if it can't read the audio off the disc, or it can't read something off the disc fast enough. And that means you've got, you've either got a slow hard drive or your hard drive's full, or, for one reason or another, it can't read off your disc. This little keyboard thing allows me to use my computer keyboard as a keyboard, basically. So if I grab a synth here, any old synth. And I'm going to drop that into, at the moment that's the audio channel, but I'm going to change that to a MIDI channel by doing it like that. And now, wait, it shouldn't take so long to load, but it does sometimes. Wait for that to load there. Come on, come on. And it hasn't. So let me create a MIDI channel here. I have to do it the basic way, and then let's drop that in there, and hopefully it'll load this time. There we go, instantly. So right, and if I arm that channel there and I put a MIDI clip in there, I can then use my computer keyboard as a MIDI controller, which is kind of quite handy. Okay, so right, next section is this whole section on your left hand side here. This is where you find everything you're going to use in Ableton. So any device that you're going to use to make music as your fundamental starting point is going to be over here. Also effects, your MIDI effects, your Macs, your external plugins are all over in this section here. So categories. Now, people get a bit confused about this sound thing, right? Quite a lot of people think that they're going to find their samples in there. This is not where samples are. This is your presets of all your Ableton instruments. So not your third-party plugins, but your Ableton instruments. So if I want to find a bass sound, it's in there. And I drop that into a MIDI channel, and then I get a bass instrument, which is not very bassy because I'm playing it off the high notes. But if I go here like this, and I go turn this on here, so I can hear it. So that's a preset. Drums, same thing. I use one over here. You've got loads of kits built into Ableton. Really cool, depending, and you can add kits depending on what version you've got, and you can also add kits as well. Instruments. Now this is a little bit different, right? So you'll find the same presets as you will in your sounds and your drums in here, but everything is grouped into individual instruments here. So I've got my wavetable, my tension, which are synths, operator, which is a synth, analog and collision, they're synths. I've got simpler, which is a sampler, sampler, which is a sampler as well. Instrument rack, where I can put multiple instruments together. Impulse is a drum machine sampler. Drum rack is where I can put drum sounds together. So these are your Ableton instruments. Now, you will find, like I said, you'll find the same presets in here as you find in your sounds. So if you want to just grab a sound, a preset, maybe go into your sounds or your drums. But if you actually want to start building your own patches together, then you'll go into your instruments here, because what I can't do in sounds, I can't open a blank synth, for example, with no patch built in it. Whereas in instruments, I can grab a wavetable synth and grab it over, and there's no patch already, it's just the default patch, so I can start building something from scratch. Same with a drum rack. If I want to drag over a blank drum rack, I can just drag that into there, and it's got nothing on it. Whereas if I go into drums and I grab a drum rack, it's all preloaded with sounds. But I can also get the one that's preloaded as well from instruments. So it's just you can access the same things but in slightly different ways. And you know, general rule is, if you want to grab a preset quickly, jump into sounds. If you want to grab a drum kit, a pre-made drum kit, quickly jump into drums. If you're more interested in building your own drum kit or building your own sounds, then go into instruments there. Okay, so audio effects, anything that processes audio at all in Ableton is called an audio effect. So compressors, EQ, delays, filters, they're all in here. MIDI effects, that's stuff that affects your MIDI notes, basically. So anything that's going to change the way that your MIDI notes are played. Once again, that will come clearer later on in the course. Right, so Max is like a third-party designer for Ableton, where you can design your own instruments, effects, and MIDI effects. And lots of people have designed third-party MIDI effects for you to use. Have designed third-party audio effects, instruments, and MIDI effects for you to use. So it's really cool. If you get Suite, you get it for free anyway. Plugins. Now this is where all your third-party plugins come in. So if you've got any VSTs, any third-party instruments, effects, plugins, they all go in here. Well, no, you have to actually tell Ableton where they are first, rather than it automatically finding them. So that's another process in itself. Clips, samples. I find this a little bit annoying, this section here, because it can be a bit misleading, because these are only the samples which are in your packs or your current project. It's not your own samples. You won't find them here. Now the second important thing to look at is places, right? Now places is where you get your user library, your current project, your that in there, and your packs, your Ableton packs are there in your places. But the important thing about places is you can add your own folders. So if you've got your own sample library, this is where you have to add it to Ableton, right? So Ableton needs to index it. So in order to index it, you need to tell it where your samples are. So I go, there we go, there's my masters there, and I go like that, and it opens that, and then it will scan that. Sometimes you get a little thing here which is spinning around, it will scan it, and then I can go in there, and I've got that, and I can use that in all future projects now. So that's where you add your own sample libraries to Ableton in places. Okay, so that's that area. So look, we were talking before about MIDI and audio, right? So MIDI, your MIDI track here, you've got two kinds of tracks in Ableton. You've got your MIDI track and you've got your audio track. Now MIDI is basically just data that you're sending to an instrument to play whatever is on that note. So you can see here we've got piano roll. On this MIDI channel, we've got a drum machine. So the note here will trigger a kick drum, and it will trigger all these different sounds. Now on this kind of channel, let's get an instrument rather than that. Let's get a synth, and I'm just going to drag that over there. So the same piano roll is going to play different sounds, right? So you're just sending MIDI data to the instrument, so it's like a virtual instrument. So you can have a synth, a drum machine, a sampler, any kind of instrument on there, and you're sending it MIDI data. If I have a MIDI channel with no instrument on it, I can play the notes and you won't hear anything coming out of it. You'll just see this MIDI coming in here. See that? There's nothing on that MIDI channel. So I need to drop an instrument in there, and I can drop whatever instrument, so I can interchange the instruments. Now it's playing that. Now it's playing this, which isn't actually making any sound, which is probably because it's a drum. It's a drum rack, so I have to put that on there, and now it's playing that. Like that, and that's playing. That's just playing those notes, and it's equally if I've got a drum kit here, and that's playing a kick drum there. If I put another instrument on that kick channel, it's going to play a note rather than playing the kick drum. So if I undo that, so you're just triggering a device, or you're sending it note information and it's playing that. So that's what a MIDI track is. The other kind of track you've got here is an audio track. So if I go into the clip here, you see a waveform. So what you see is a waveform. In this, you see the piano roll. Here you see a waveform, and I click on the top of that, and you don't have anything there. So that's just playing an audio loop now. So what we have is, so you've got a selection of audio and MIDI tracks, and then what you have is the track itself is very similar to a traditional analog mixer or a DJ mixer. Okay, so I'm going to go on a little bit over the half an hour today. So here I've got a channel, it's linear, and what I've got here is I've got the mixer. So this is like a DJ mixer. Or an analog mixer, and what I've got on the end of that track is, if it's a MIDI track, I've got a MIDI instrument, but I can also drop effects on the track as well. So let's look at the audio track. I've got that loop there, so I could drop an audio effect linearly on the end of that track here. And that will affect that track. Like that. I've also got a send and return on each track, so that sends to the reverb, to the delay. And same with the instrument tracks, I can put an effect on them as well. I just have to put it after the instrument, after the MIDI track. So if I could put, let's put, for example, a flanger on that. No, not on the kick. Let's put a flanger on the hi-hat, for example. Or something, a redux. Okay, so we're putting effects on in a linear fashion there. So that's your channels. You've got your master channel here. You've got your return channels here. We're going to look into that in more detail later. And this view here we spoke about is your session view. So the other view that you can go and see from here is your arrange page. Now, each of these channels is shared by both the pages. So on the MIDI channel, I have the same instrument on both pages. We have a mixer on both pages, which is shared. It's just displayed slightly differently. Here it's displayed numerically. Here you actually get a fader like this. So what is shared between both the arrange and the session view is the channel itself, the instruments, the effects that are on those instruments, the mixer levels, the panning, the sends, all that's shared. What isn't shared is the clips. So I can have a different clip in session view than the one that's playing back from the arrange page. So I can record right from session view into the arrange page as well, or I can drag and drop stuff. As soon as I hit record here, it's going to start recording this stuff in. And if I want to play this back, I have to hit this orange button here, and I can play that back anytime I want. Okay, so look, that's my very quick guide to Ableton. Hopefully you got something from that. Now it's over to you guys for questions. I'm going to hit YouTube again and have a look at this. Okay, so let's see what's been going on in the chat room. Okay, yeah, so Ableton has to be, right, so Ableton has to be quiet because it's a demonstration, and if it gets too loud, then you won't be able to hear me talking over the top of it. So it's more of a demonstration rather than me, you know, smashing out tracks. So it's trying to get that balance between where it's loud enough so you can roughly hear what's going on and what I'm doing, but also so you can hear me talking loud and clear as well. So that's why it may not be overly loud. Okay, so the webcam image is covering the BPM. Okay, well look, that happens, right? It's got to be somewhere, and it will always cover something, and it's too much, too long if I have to move it around. So that's the, you know, the best place for it to be, I think, up there. Thank you, James. That's very nice of you to say that. Right, so okay, so right, so let's get back. Got some questions here. This is good. Okay, how well does Ableton sync with Native Instruments gear software? Syncs amazingly. You know, you can use Rewire, or you can use you know, what I do is for, say, Machine, for example, I use that as an instrument inside Ableton, and it syncs perfectly, absolutely perfectly. Do you advise split your drums on different channels? I think that's a very good way of working. And a lot of people, when they're starting out, they try and put all their drums on one drum rack or whatever. Easier to program your drums that way, for sure. But actually, it's much harder to arrange, do automation, put certain effects on, jam out live. So yeah, you know, definitely advise that you have one drum sound per channel. So the reverb and delay sends are there to be used with any instrument. Yep, you can use them with any instrument. You can also add your own sends and returns and change the ones that are there. You know, that's just what happens when you open Ableton. You default to having you know, a send and a return. You know, that's how your default Ableton page is. 2 audio channels, 2 MIDI channels, a send and a return with a reverb and a delay. That just makes things easier to start off with. But you can change them. You know, you can add return tracks. You can change the devices on them. So you've got a lot of control over that stuff. How can we adjust loops to different pitches? Okay, so I mean that's pretty easy, right? So we've got audio loop here, and we go into the loop itself, and we've got lots of different controls over the loop. So one of them is transpose. bit over. So we can change the pitch there in the transpose of the audio loop. And that's independent from the BPM. Okay, is it necessary to use both session and arrangement view? Right, so definitely use some session view. Okay, so there are producers, most people that I know anyway, that use Ableton and that are self-taught have never used session view, and that is doing yourself a big injustice to never use session view. So you know, some people really like arranging in the arrange page, but even for those people, session view is a great place to be, you know, put a musical scratch pad. So it's a great place to put ideas together, to, you know, have fun, come up with ideas, try things out. So at the very least, session view should be for that. But on the other end of the scale, you've got people that arrange everything live in session view, and they only use the arrange page to record it into. Now, most people are somewhere in between, who have learnt to use Ableton properly. The reason a lot of people don't use session view is because they're self-taught and they've come from another DAW, another DAW that does not have that function. So they've never bothered to learn it. So don't do yourself a disservice. Make sure that you learn how to use session view. It's a lot of fun, and at the very least it'll be your musical scratch pad, your place, you'll come up with ideas. At the other end of the scale, you may find it revolutionary, and you may arrange all your stuff that way from now on. Will the sequence Ableton create a pattern in TB03? Yeah. Yes, of course. You can anything with a MIDI in on it can be sequenced with Ableton. So you can use Ableton to sequence external instruments as well as plugins, as well as the Ableton instruments. So yes, you can. Right, so I'm a bit lost now. I've got loads of questions here. Whoa, loads of questions. Okay, so how can we play single loop parts at different pitches? Okay, so that's something that you're going to discover a little bit later, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that in the masterclass over the next coming weeks. Is it good for making a final track, because you can choose what and where each element goes? Yeah, so I mean, you'd use a mixture of session view and arrangement to make the final track. Thank you, Philip. Very good intro, really covered all the basics. Mo, are we supposed to use racks only for now before week 2, or can we use loops? Because in the videos the note shows you could use whatever you want, mate. If it helps you learn, then do it. Yeah, if you're able to have fun with it. Thank you, Glitched Out. Are there any plugins you recommend? Not at the moment, just use what's in Ableton. Right, so I want to clear up some. Well, so I've seen that some people have spoken about this already. Right, so I want to clear this up a little bit. Right, so in your final assessment, you cannot use third-party plugins at all. Right, so you can't use Massive or Machine or anything. You can, however, use factory loop packs if you use them in Ableton instruments. So you could get a sound, which I'll show you over the next couple of weeks how we're going to do this. You can get a sound from a loop pack and put it into Simpler and make it your own. So you can use samples from anywhere in your production. What it's getting at when it says don't use third-party factory loops is don't make a loop pack banger. So don't just grab a bunch of loops, put them together and hope you'll get a good mark. You have to show that you can use MIDI. You have to show that you can use Ableton instruments. If you want to use sounds from third-party loops, if you want to use a couple of loops in your productions, it's not the end of the world. But don't make an entire track out of factory pack loops. You will not get a good mark for it. That's what it's saying. Is it possible to use the second view by having it shown, for instance? No, right. So you have to kind of switch between them. Yeah, so you have to switch between them, basically. Right, so I'm a machine user, but wiring machine into Ableton is such a hassle even when using a temp. Right, so I'm a machine user as well. What I do is I drag and drop the audio from machine. It's so easy. Or you just export all the audio from machine and then import it into Ableton as individual sounds. That's the way that I do it. It makes life so much easier than recording it in and all that nonsense. So just export the audio, bang, bring it in, lay it out as loops. Perfect. Okay, so Tom, hopefully it answered your question then. Right, so Shelf, I'm going to show you how to do some basic sampling next week, especially with like Simpler and stuff like that. Yeah, are we allowed to use our MIDI keyboards to create sequences? 100%. You should be using your MIDI keyboard to create sequences. So yes, 100%. I also. Right, so it's nice to have a MIDI keyboard, but if that's the way you're kind of used to doing it, then that's fine. It's about getting the gear that works for you, basically. That's the important thing. Getting the gear that works for you. If it works for you, then that's a good way of working. There's certain criteria you have to meet on the, on the assessments, but it's not. You have to use a MIDI controller, or you can draw the notes in, you can play them live from your computer keyboard, you can play them using machine. You don't have to use a MIDI controller, you don't have to use a certain MIDI controller, you don't have to use push, so however you feel comfortable creating is good. Nice. MPC Studio is nice. But so push 2, some people absolutely love push 2. Now, I would say it's probably better for production than it is for live. I do live sets and I don't really use push 2. But, it's horses for courses. It's the best thing to do if you're it's not cheap. So the best thing to do if you're considering push 2 is go somewhere and try it out. Some people are absolutely in love with it and they're like, I need this. Other people, it's not so important to them. They're happy with a £25, $30 controller keyboard because that's all they need to do. So, depends on your way of working, your workflow, that kind of stuff, on what kit is best for you. Yeah, exactly. Can we use sampler synth and use it in Simpler? not only can you do that, that's how I recommend that you, if you do want to use any third-party instruments, that's how I go about it. So I would sample it or multi-sample it, sample the notes you need, and then use simpler in Ableton. So that's a great way of doing that. So for the assignment, is everyone for making it out of stock Ableton plugins? No, you can use third-party loops, but you must use the Ableton plugins and instruments. But they're actually really powerful, so it's a good chance for you to learn to use them. You've got great compressors, you've got great EQ, you've got great effects, you've got subtractive synths, you've got wavetable synth, you've got FM synthesis, you've got samplers which are as advanced as Akai's top samplers. You've got physical modeling synths. You've got everything in there in Ableton Suite, which is powerful for advanced producers. In fact, as an advanced producer, you should be able to get a very advanced track just using Ableton instruments, and it will teach you how to use Ableton very, very well. Is it possible to rewire to Cubase for our projects? You can rewire to Cubase, but what you hand in has to be Ableton. So if you're rewiring into Cubase, then you can't hand in a project with a Cubase element in it. So you have to either record it in from Cubase or sample it or something. So yes and no. No, right, so you can't use third-party plugins. So if you're going to be using Complete Control, then you have to sample those sounds in into Ableton. So it's only Ableton instruments. Okay, right. Right, so there are no, Chris, there are no weekly assignments. There's 2 assignments on the course. There's weekly tests, which are self-tests, that you don't hand them in to me. They're not assessed. They're just for your own benefit to test yourself, to try and better yourself. You've got 2 assignments. You've got a written assignment, which is due in first, and then you've got a track that you've got to hand in. So it's all there on the VLE for you to go and check it out. Potato, exactly, mate. So you can make patches in a third-party plugin and record them in Simpler or Sampler. That would be legal. Yeah, legal. Well, we're not talking really in terms of the realms of the law, but yeah, that would be the perfect way of doing it. Yeah, exactly. And it shows your sampling skills that way as well. And you never know, you may find a new way of warping sounds that you couldn't normally do in the instrument itself. Yeah, so Max for Live patches are allowed. Yeah, there's loads of good stuff on Max for Live. Okay, so Shelf Pup, we have answered that one already further up. So the quick answer is, if it's worth it for you, then it's worth it. It's great for some people. Some people love it. It's a lot of money, so go and try it out before you buy it. But it's that simple. Maybe you'll love it. A lot of people I know actually fall in love with it and they want to buy it. Other people aren't so convinced. So your choice again. Push to, I love it. Yeah, exactly. Horses for courses. Okay, so Eddie, simpler is a simple sampler. You've got two samplers in Ableton. You've got simpler and you've got sampler. Simpler is a really simple, easy to use one. Although it's got more complicated over time. It's not as simple as it was. And sampler is the fully fledged multi-sampling beast, basically. It's like a top of the range Akai sampler, basically, of the late 90s, I would say. Okay, so are we alright to freeze tracks with third-party plug? Yeah, I mean, freezing and flattening is one way of going about it. It's not my preferred method though, because one, it can take up a lot of space, and you've only got a 1 gigabyte upload limit. Two, people make the mistake of freezing it and flattening it without showing the MIDI, so they don't copy the channel first. So I've just got audio. I can't mark an audio track. That's the problem. So I need to see the MIDI that's gone into it. It needs to be labelled clearly if you are going to go down that route. I would recommend, I mean, if you absolutely have to, you can, but there's risks involved. What I would recommend is that you sample the instrument in, or you use an Ableton instrument, because not only is it good. I mean, I'm not going to lie, they're not as good as a lot of the third-party instruments, but working purely in Ableton and using the instruments purely in Ableton is going to make you a much more accomplished Ableton user, just because you're working the Ableton way all the time. So you're going to go away with the course, and you're going to have gathered a lot more knowledge on Ableton than if you're using Ableton with your already known third-party plugins, if that makes sense. So you may discover, it's going to massively widen your, your choice of things to use as well, because you may discover that actually the compressor in Ableton does a better job on certain things, or the wavetable synth is really good for that sound that you really wanted to get but you couldn't get in your third-party plugins. So it's a really good exercise to be focusing inside Ableton and learning inside Ableton. Does that make sense? Yeah, so there's a little bit on Ableton Push in the course, but it's short. It's not that much because, it's we don't want to alienate people who use Push. Okay, guys. So look, we're coming to the end of the tutorial now. Just trying to catch up to see if there's any last questions that really need answering. Okay, so something about here and collecting all and saving. Right, so that is vitally important. Let me just show you that before I say goodbye. Right, so this is really, really important process, right? All these core kits, this sample here, if I save this project without collecting all and save, and I open it, I won't be able to hear any of the sounds. So what I need to do is I need to go save set as, I'm going to call this Masterclass 1. I'm going to save it there, and then, oh no, I need to save it somewhere else. So save as, save it on my desktop here. I'm going to save it in extra space like that. And so I've saved that, and then I need to go to collect all and save, and I have to make sure all these yellow boxes are ticked on there. Go, okay, and that's going to collect everything and save it into one place there. So then I need to send that project file when I'm sending. So what I need to send now is, if I go into my extra space here, I need to go into extra space, Let's put this to date added. It always does my heading. Which one's the right one to use? Okay, so you got that Masterclass project. So I need to zip up that whole project there. Not the ALF set inside it, but the whole project. So that's it then, guys. That was your first masterclass. Very basic. We're going to get on to creating more stuff next time, basically. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of actually creating stuff in Ableton next week. So look, great to meet you guys, and looking forward to meeting you in your one-to-ones. Hang tight on that one-to-one thing. For now, maybe you'll get someone else, another instructor, to offer slots next week, or maybe I'll pick up with you and do the one-to-ones the week after. But everyone, peace out. Been a pleasure. Take it easy.